a supportive community so that Muslims can come into contact with other sectors of the community, and that aims to widen their horizons and to eliminate misunderstandings. We are very pleased today to be able to co-organize this event with the Chinese University. And in the next hour or so, you'll be hearing talks by Professor Brown and Justice Bokhary on the human rights, the Islamic and the Western perspective. The moderator of this event is Professor James Frankel. Now, in welcoming you, I have been told, in fact warned, not to impeach on the province of Professor Frankel, who will be introducing the two speakers to you. And I've been told not to touch on the two speakers. So immediately I will leave that to Professor Frankel. What I've not been told is not to mention anything about Professor Frankel. So let me introduce Professor Frankel to you. Professor Frankel holds a PhD on religion from Columbia University. He is an associate professor at the Chinese University, in particular the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies, and is the director of the Center for Study of Islamic Center. His expertise is in history of Islam in China, with special emphasis on comparative history of ideas, religion, and culture. He has a number of publications, and if I were to go through each one of them, it will take far too much time, as I've only been allocated 5 minutes to speak to you. But I will make mention of two of his publications, which are well worth reading. The first one is his first book, with the interesting title of Rectifying God's Name, Liu Xi's Confucian Translation of Monotheism and Islamic Law. Liu Xi is a scholar and philosopher, also a Sunni Muslim, who lived in the 17th and 18th century in Qing Dynasty, China. And it will be refreshing for you to read that book and to see what Professor Frankel says of this fantastic person. Another publication by Professor Frankel is a paper on Sayyid ibn Abi Waqqas, the first Muslim to set foot in Guangzhou and China. And that goes back to the 7th and 8th century AD. Both of these papers are well worth reading. And fearing that I've run out of my time, I will give the mic over to Professor Frankel to introduce to you the two speakers today. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Brother Sufayed, for this humbling introduction. I very much appreciate that. Thank you also for inviting us here today to be able to share our gift of Professor Brown's expertise. We had the honor this year of inviting him to be the third scholar to offer a distinguished lecture series at the Chinese University and then also here at the community in Hong Kong. So it's on behalf of the Center for the Study of Islamic Culture at the Chinese University, I'm so grateful first to be able to bring Professor Brown to Hong Kong and then also to be able to share him with you today. Let me introduce to you first let me tell you the schedule for today, the rundown of how this is going to proceed. First we will have a talk by Professor Brown. I assume that will take around 40 minutes or so. And then that will be followed by, inshallah, that will be followed by a response from Justice Bokhary, who is our discussant today. Then, I know you're all very eager probably to ask questions, and I'm sure the topic will also inspire questions in you. But again, as I will tell you, and as I'm forecasting here, Professor Brown is also an expert in other areas of Islamic studies, and therefore, if you have other questions on related topics, that's also appropriate for you to ask them. So, please store your questions or write them down so that when I will collect them and then have our speakers address them, okay, one by one. So let me introduce to you our very distinguished speakers today. First, let me introduce to you Professor Jonathan A.C. Brown, who is the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization and the director of the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Professor Brown is, he received his degrees in history at Georgetown University and then in religion, religious studies at University of Chicago.
Near Eastern Language and Civilizations.
Oh, I'm sorry. Near Eastern Language and Civilizations.
This is a big territorial issue.
It is. I tried to claim him into our camp, but actually, I apologize. Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. He wasn't fortunate enough to study religion. Anyway, Professor Brown is, he taught at the University of Washington before returning to his alma mater at Georgetown University, where he is now in the School of Foreign Service. Professor Brown is I can say that he is very well versed in a number of areas. His initial research focused on Hadith history, Hadith studies, and this also led him to study Islamic law. And we've been very fortunate to hear some of his recent research also on topics such as human rights, which is today's theme, and also Islam and slavery, on which he gave a talk a few days ago at the Chinese University. Again, if I were to run through the entire list of publications, we would be here for a very long time, but I will just mention some of his very notable publications, 3 books in particular. His book on Hadith is called Hadith, Muhammad's Legacy in the Medieval and Modern World, published in 2009. Then followed by Misquoting Muhammad, The Challenges and Choices of Interpreting the Prophet's Legacy, which was published back in 2014. And his forthcoming book is on Islam and slavery, which should be coming out, inshallah, later this year. So we are very, very pleased to have Professor Brown. And as I said, you may ask him questions about these various topics, these interrelated topics, in addition to today's topic of human rights. Responding to Professor Brown as discussant is our other very distinguished guest, Justice Kemal Bokhary, whom many of you may know as a prominent member of the Hong Kong Muslim community. Justice Bokhary is a fifth generation Hong Konger. So he's been here longer than many of us. Born in Hong Kong in 1947, Justice Bokhary then studied law in London and was called to the bar as a lawyer in England in 1970 and then in Hong Kong the following year in 1971. He practiced commercial and corporate law for a long time here in Hong Kong before becoming a judge. And then he was a founding member of the Court of Final Appeal and served as a permanent member of that court for many years, hearing and ruling on many important cases. And now today he is what is the term? Non-permanent member of the Court of Final Appeals as well. Justice Bokhary is also a published author, and one of his books is particularly germane to today's topic. He wrote a book called Human Rights, Source, Content, and Enforcement. So he is, I could say, a qualified expert on the topic of human rights as well. He's also written many other books, including illustrated books that he has illustrated himself. I can say from my experience that he has a wide knowledge on a number of different topics, and I'm sure that he will be able to share that with you today as well. So without further ado, we only have limited time, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for your questions and for interaction between the audience and the speakers. So without further ado, I will, would you please join me in welcoming Professor Brown.
Stand on this or not?
Your heights, perhaps you don't.
Yeah, but I feel like, okay, well, I'll lean over. This is good? Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله به نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First of all, thank you all for inviting me. Thanks for coming. Thanks to James, Ida for organizing everything. Thanks to Aslan for taking me around. Thanks to Justice Bokhary and his family for hosting us. And it's great to come to an event where at least one of the two speakers is qualified to speak on a subject. That's not me in this case. Not only am I not the most qualified person here, I'm also not the best dressed. I'm sort of bracketed by two people who are... I didn't wear a tie because I thought there's no way anyone's going to be wearing a tie. There's a person with a cravat and a bow tie on the panel, but James, with great foresight, didn't want me to be the worst dressed guy on the panel. Okay, so I'll do my best. And you know what, the best thing about this talk is, if I make mistakes, Justice Bokhary can correct me, and I don't mind. I really don't mind. I'll learn something. This is not my area of expertise. Okay. But I treat opportunities like this as a chance to learn enough to convince others that I'm an expert. What are human rights? The simple answer is human rights are rights that humans have. In fact, they're rights that people have just because they're human. So if you're a human being, you have human rights. It's pretty simple. You don't have to be American citizen or Chinese citizen or Hong Kong resident or whatever. You have human rights. Now, a lot of that seems pretty simple. And in fact, in a lot of discussions, I think in, let's say, the salons of Washington, D.C. or of any liberal educated community, although I maybe shouldn't include Washington, D.C. in that group, but any liberal educated community, in London or in Berlin or in Hong Kong, right? Human rights are sort of a fixed point of inquiry, right? If there's something you want to, if you're in a cocktail party or, for Muslims, non-cocktail party conversation, and you invoke human rights, the conversation sort of ends there, right? That's, everybody respects human rights. Everybody knows these are sort of the basic foundation of the values that we all share. except, what is the president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, who said that I don't give an expletive inserted about human rights. So some people don't, but in general, that's pretty almost heretical to say you don't care about human rights. But what's interesting about any concept that is just assumed to be understood and assumed to be authoritative is that it's not only always more complicated than that, it is actually guaranteed to be much more complicated than those things that we regularly debate. We don't debate things that we don't talk that are assumed to be understood by all precisely because if we debated them, we'd get into discussions that would rupture these consensuses that we have. So let me ask you, or I don't know if you should answer, or I'll just ask you to think about a question, which is it okay for somebody to set themselves on fire and burn themselves to death? Does anyone have an opinion they want to share? Yes or no? No? Nobody says yes? Yes? Okay, one guy. I like this guy. So, if this is America, what do you think the answer would be? It's freedom, man. So it have to be free. Just set yourself on fire. So, okay, let's say, why would somebody set themselves on fire? You could say, look, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, you can do whatever you want. You want to go out into a field, let yourself on fire, not going to hurt anyone else, not going to catch anything else on fire, then it's a free country. That's what we would say in the U.S. So here we'd be thinking about the fact that what's the most important thing is that people are free to make their own choices, so they have autonomy, and their autonomy and their consent to something is what makes it okay, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of others or they're not harming other people. Okay. Now, some people, except for this guy, no one else seems to think that it's okay to light yourself on fire and kill yourself. But what reasons might we have? We might say, this is not the kind of society we want to have. We're afraid this is going to set a bad precedent. We're afraid it's going to be traumatic, maybe to others. So maybe you're not actually lighting someone else on fire or killing them, but you're harming the community. You're harming our values, our sense of peace and well-being. We don't want this to, excuse the pun, catch on with other people, right? Another possible objection would be, we're not really sure this person made this choice on their own. Maybe they felt pressured to do it. Maybe, they're not. Maybe they felt social expectation. And so, on big issues like someone choosing to kill themselves, we're not going to allow this to happen because it's still autonomy and consent that's very important to us, but we're so interested in protecting this that we want to make on these big decisions, on things that we don't really think people actually would ever choose to do reasonably. We're not going to allow them to do it because we're afraid that they're not really making that choice on their own. Or we might say, we don't think the person's in their right mind. Finally, we might say, consent is interesting, autonomy is interesting, these are important, but there's something else we haven't talked about, which is that human beings have an inherent dignity. I mean, the human body, it's like a beautiful piece of Chinese pottery, I might own it, and technically I might have the right to drop it and smash it, but somebody might say, this is an inherently beautiful thing, and you can't choose to destroy it. So that human beings have somehow this inherent dignity that they shouldn't be able to choose to destroy themselves, especially in such a painful and gruesome way. Now, if you think about just this simple question about even why we wouldn't allow or wouldn't want someone to burn themselves to death, there's actually a lot of assumptions, different assumptions. Is it consent? Is it about autonomy? Is it about notions of harm in the community? So, for example, when I said earlier, maybe the American answer would be, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, you can do whatever you want. But how do you define hurt? How do you define harm? Maybe harm isn't just going and punching someone or hitting someone or lighting them on fire. It's hurting them. It's about what kind of responsibilities does that person have to their family, to other people in the society. So how do we define harm? Do we think of human beings as having inherent dignity, that they don't have the right to do anything they want with their bodies? So there's a the second we start talking about specific cases, things become much more complicated. And then we ask ourselves just another simple question. Okay, if human rights are rights that everybody has just because they're a human being, then you have the question of, what's a human being? I mean, is a human being a member of the species Homo sapiens? That's one approach, is sort of a biological approach to human rights, which would say that if you're a member of the species of Homo sapiens, you have these rights. And then you might ask yourself, well, maybe some people are, they're very seriously disabled, they're in a coma or vegetative state. Does that person have all the human rights that someone else has? You might think of, for a long time in human history, we thought of rights or human beings, as being something created, at least in the Christian tradition, in the image of God. Imago Dei. The idea that in the Christian tradition, that human is created in the image of God. Or even if we go into the Islamic tradition, the idea that the human being has a nafs, has a soul. This sort of divinely infused soul. And that is what a human being is. A human being is a creature with a soul. And that might not change. So when we talk about the person who's in a coma or in a vegetative state or very seriously disabled, a sort of very biological or almost practical approach to what a human being is might say this person is really no longer a human being. But from the notion of the soul as being what defines who you are, as long as you're sitting there and breathing, that soul is present. So you start having different ideas of what a human being is, where the boundary lines of a human being are. Now, you could then get into the discussion of what's a right. What is a right? A right is maybe a claim you have on other people. They have to do things for you. It's things that they can't stop you from doing, that others can't stop you from doing, or that others have to do for you, or can't do to you. But then you realize, wait a second, rights aren't absolute. So if you say, I have a right to property, this is my watch, or this is my house, I have a right to this property. And indeed, James can't take that from me. But if the government says, we need to build this important new bus line or tram line or something, and everybody in the whole community is going to benefit from it, we're going to pay you fairly for this house, but we're going to take the house and we're going to destroy it and use the land for our tram line. Now, in fact, I've lost my right. You might say that a lot of people, I would say this, that human beings have a right never to be tortured. You never have the right to intentionally inflict pain on someone in order to get information from them or make them do something. And it doesn't matter how much you gain or how afraid you are of some terrorist who might have a ticking time bomb somewhere. You can never torture somebody. But a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, a lot of people in the American government, would say, no, actually, we think that you can do this as people if you feel that it's necessary. What is the relationship between the individual and the community? I know this is a big topic in certainly the kind of Chinese sphere, discussions around human rights, the idea that Western rights are very individualistic, and other parts of the world, including East Asia, you might have more of a communal notion of rights, and that the individual's rights, the idea that my house can get taken and bulldozed to build a tram line, maybe that can happen a lot more, that sort of thing can happen a lot more in a society or tradition where communal rights are more important, or have more important than in other places where individual rights are very important. Okay. We could ask ourselves where these rights even come from. We said you have these because you're a human being. But where do human beings come from? Where's the world that human beings exist in? So, are human beings given rights by God? Do human beings have rights because they are rational beings? Do human beings have rights because they're just practically essential. So for example, we could have a little society here and we'd say, look, in order for us to do anything, we're going to have to respect, you can't just go and punch someone, kick someone, kill somebody. You have to sort of generally respect that everybody has their own stuff. They have sort of should be able to do what they want unless there's some reason not to. So just sometimes you might say, right, it's just practical, kind of practical, obvious things that a community has to have. Of course, that's going to differ then on the nature of that community. Or you might say, and this is, I think, gets into maybe something that Justice Bokhary is interested in, are rights aspirational? Are human rights really about the future we want, the society we want to have, not just what we need as a kind of basic foundation to function, but the society we want to have, that we want to talk about not just the right to property and to physical inviolability and not to be tortured and the right to have your own religion, but also you have the right to be not to be poor. You have the right to be educated. You have the right to health care. So it's about charting a course forward, not just looking at the past or the present. And of course, you can imagine huge debates between communities or between civilizations over what a human right is. And this is a great example of this, is you can look at sort of Cold War, 1970s, 1980s debates over human rights between Americans and Soviet Union. Where Americans would say the right to freedom of speech and the right to freedom of religion these are basic foundational fundamental rights. They cannot be infringed upon unless you have extremely good reason. Whereas, and they'd say, things like healthcare, education, childcare, employment, these are good, these are important, but you don't need these. I mean, this is really between members of a society, and maybe the society and the government, the people in the government, they can dispute these things. But no, freedom of speech and religion, these are foundational rights. Whereas, at least according to Soviet thinkers, I'm not sure, this is what they said, right? They said things like, no, speech and religion, these are luxuries. People's foundational rights include things like healthcare, childcare, employment, housing, and stuff like freedom of mobilization and things like that. These are stuff they're interesting, they're fun to have, but they really are not as important as these other material rights. Okay. What about the Islamic tradition? And this is going to be a little bit of overlap, sorry, with my other talk the other day, but I think I'm correct in saying this. Muslims kind of invented human rights. I'll take correction if that's not true. What I mean is that it's not that Muslims are the first people to think about having rights or that people might have rights or things like that. But the idea of saying rights of human beings, all human beings have certain rights and they're called rights of human beings. I think Muslims are the first people to say this. In the late 700s of the Common Era, Muslim scholars started talking about what's called Hukuk al-Ibad. Hukuk al-Ibad means the rights of the servants of God. What are the servants of God? Human beings. That's how the Quran oftentimes talks about human beings. Ibadullah, right? God doesn't, لا يظلم الله ليس الله بالظلام للعبيد. God does not wrong any of the servants. So the servants of God are human beings. And indeed, you see in the Islamic tradition between the 700s and the 1000s of the Common Era, or the 700s and the 1000s, two different directions or two different kind of traditions of Muslim scholars deriving these rights of human beings. One is sort of a bottom-up process in which jurists start looking at the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, the legal thought of the early Muslim generations, the companions, the successors, and start trying to abstract, draw out of these certain rights. And they come up with three basic rights. Someone doesn't say, as far as I know, verily I have come up with three basic rights. You just notice this. It starts to get mentioned in their books in the late 700s, the early 800s. The first one, isma, physical inviolability. So you can't kill someone or punch someone or hurt somebody without just cause. And if you do that, you owe that person some compensation. Or you've done a crime. You're going to be punished, or you owe that person compensation, or both. The second one, so the first one's isma, physical inviolability. The second one is property, mal. You have the right to own property, and when you have that property, people can't take it away from you except with just cause. The third one is, they actually, as far as I know, Muslim scholars didn't actually have a term for it. But the concept was there, and they would refer to it through various phrases. But in effect, in English we call it the right to due process. What is the right to due process? It means you can't accuse someone isn't guilty of something, or someone isn't liable of something, liable for something, without some kind of process in which that's been proven. And the presumption is innocent. Someone is innocent and not liable until they've been proven guilty or liable of something. And the other party who's making that claim has to provide evidence that this person, what they're saying about this person having committed a crime or done something wrong or being responsible for something. They have to provide evidence that this is true. The person who has been accused, if the accuser has no evidence, the person being accused doesn't have to provide any evidence. Right? So, physical inviolability, property, and due process. At the same time, as I said, Muslim scholars are engaging in thinking about these issues from a top-down approach, from a theoretical, legal theory, theological ruminations about the relationship between God and human beings, between God and man. And what they said is, first they came up with 3 rights. Human beings have the right to physical inviolability, nafs or isma, the right to property. They have the right to chastity or family. So you have the right to a unbroken, untainted, undisturbed relationship between spouses and between parents and children. To this they added the right to religion. Everybody has a right to practice their religion. They can't be forced to leave their religion. And they have the right to practice their religion. And they have the right to reason, which is an interesting concept. Human beings have the right to reason. They have the right to be of sound mind. They have the right to be of sound mind. They have the right to dignity, ird, or honor. Dignity and honor. Now, you can see here that the longer the list grows, the more questionable it becomes if these are really human rights, i.e. everybody has these to the same degree. Because we might say everybody has a right to physical inviolability, everybody has a right to property, everybody has the right to due process. And this is, in fact, entirely true. This is true for all human beings in Islamic law. Whether you're Muslim or Christian or polytheist or whatever. It doesn't matter. Physical inviolability, property, due process. You also, by the way, have the right to religion. So Muslims will protect the rights of other people to follow their religion. But there's not equal right to reason. Who can tell me why there's not equal right to reason? Under Islamic law, can Christians drink alcohol or not? Can they get drunk or not? Yes, they can. So they're actually depriving themselves of the right to reason, and Muslims are saying, okay, go for it. It's your religion. So dignity in Islamic civilization in general, non-Muslims were not allowed to have houses that were taller than Muslim houses, things like this. So there's this idea that Muslims have more dignity than non-Muslims. And it was somewhat controversial, but it's generally true. So there's also this, you start to see differences in how we think about dignity or some of these rights. All right. A lot of these, and now when we look back at the Quran, we can really see some of these rights very clearly articulated there. So the notion of human dignity, you could say the verse لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, right? we have bestowed, no, we have ennobled the children of Adam. وَحَمَلْنَاهُ عَلَى الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِمَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ تَفْضِيلًا. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have created human beings in the best of forms. It doesn't say Christians or Jews or Chinese or non-Chinese. It's everybody. Human beings are created in the best of forms. And then life. لا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق. Do not kill the soul, the being, the life that God has made inviolable, except with some just cause. And that God says that God wrote for the children of Israel, the Bani Israel, and everybody else. What is it? من قتل نفس بغير حق أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا. Right? The person who kills the soul, نفس بغير نفس, kill the soul without, for a reason, like the person didn't commit murder, or the person wasn't engaged in some kind of crime in the world, committing corruption in the world. If you kill somebody without just cause, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. And if you save a life, it's as if you saved all of humanity. You've revived all of humanity. You have the right to property alluded to. لِرِجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَا. Right? The men have a share in what they earn. Women have a share in what they earn. And what was the other? لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراضٍ. So do not eat, do not consume and misuse and take your property, your plural property amongst you, for false or wrong reasons. It has to be it has to be commerce that is done with consent. With people have to choose to engage in commerce. You can't just take someone's property away from them. So, let me end with a concrete example, getting back to the case I gave you in the beginning, or the example I used in the beginning. Somebody setting themselves on fire. And this gives us a good idea, an interesting idea of how Muslims in Islamic civilization thought about human rights in a way that differs maybe from American or British traditions. Everyone here has heard of sati? Sati?
Yeah.
What is sati?
We don't use words.
Yeah, sati is in like especially Rajput Hindu tradition, kind of northern Indian tradition, that the wife, a noble woman, the wife of a sort of a noble man who had died, or especially died in battle, would put herself on the pyre, the funeral pyre of her dead husband, and burn to death with him. Now, question: did the British like sati? No. The British prohibited sati in 1829, and when some people came up to these British officials and said, this is kind of our culture, and you should let us do what our culture and our religion says. They said, okay, you can do that, and then we're going to do what our culture and our religion says, and we're going to execute you for allowing this to happen. And it's interesting, in the American court cases, if you look at American court cases in the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s about things like polygamy in the Mormon community, they would use sati as the ultimate example of why freedom of religion can be and must be restricted. Because this was the inconceivable thing. It was inconceivable that we could allow someone to burn themselves to death. This was sort of like if you're sitting in an argument and you're talking about freedom of religion, and you're saying, your opponent is saying freedom of religion is absolute, and you say, so should someone be allowed to set themselves do sati? And they'd say, no, of course, that we can't have. So in the kind of Anglo-Saxon tradition, the idea of the widow burning herself to death is a bridge too far. This is unacceptable. You can't do this. There was partially it was because they were worried these people were being forced to do it. But a bigger reason is that suicide itself, this is a huge sin in the Christian tradition. Sin in the Islamic tradition is a sin in the Christian tradition. And the Anglo-Saxon tradition of law and morality was not willing to think of other traditions as having a right to think about death in a way that was different from theirs. So if suicide is a sin and unacceptable for us, we're really not willing to allow this for other people. How did Muslims deal with the question of sati? Does anyone know? I'm curious. I did a whole research paper on this. I find this fascinating. Yeah, so actually going back to the 1300s, to what's called the Delhi Sultanate, which is the first major Muslim state in North India, they would allow it under one condition. The woman had to get permission from the ruler, the Muslim governor or the Muslim sultan, had to get permission. And in fact, if you ever have heard of Ibn Battuta, everyone's heard of Ibn Battuta? I think he went to China, didn't he?
Debatable.
I think it sounds right. It's something he would do.
Yes.
Okay, but I mean, so Ibn Battuta is this famous traveler from Tangier who dies in around the 1360s, in the 1360s of the Common Era. He actually spends a number of years in Delhi, under the Delhi Sultanate, and he actually sees that one of the sati take place. So we know exactly what the procedure was. The woman would have to go and get permission from the governor or the sultan. And this was also repeated under the Mughal emperors. Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb. And there's these different reports that the Mughal emperors would prohibit sati. But they didn't prohibit sati. They prohibited it if you don't get permission. They prohibited forced sati. So if somebody was being pressured by their family or being drugged, sometimes people would drug these women and put them on the fire. That was prohibited. But if a woman came to the Mughal emperor or to his local governor and said, I want to do this, we have some even European travelers were there and saw these interviews take place. They described what happens. The woman would say, I really want to do this. And the Muslim governor would say, are you sure? You're sure about this? I can't convince you otherwise. I'll find you a husband. I'll take care of your family. I'll give you a stipend. You won't be poor. You won't be discriminated against. If the woman still says, no, I want to do this, they would say, this is your religion. This is your religious belief. We allow you to do it. So you see here, what I think the Islamic tradition gives us, first of all, one of the earliest articulations of human rights, maybe the earliest. Second, I think a very good articulation of human rights. And one of what I personally like about it, in a movie preview, in a world that's increasingly diverse, increasingly interconnected, right? A country like the United States, where I'm from, is going to be much more diverse, much more internally culturally diverse, internally religiously diverse. Islamic law is a very minimal human rights regime. So if you look at the list of things, there's some people who say that the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which is sort of the foundational modern human rights document, it says that the right to vacation, human beings have a human right to vacation, a certain vacation every year. And there's other people who say you have the right to choose work that is fulfilling. And then other people might say, and many people do today in the US and in the West, that the right to whatever sexual orientation you want and whatever kind of sexual relationships, this is a human right. The more rights you start adding, and the more clearly these rights start coming out of a certain view of the world and a certain tradition, the less convincing this is to others. That the less effective it becomes, it is as a really unifying model. The more effective is to have a really minimal list of rights. And this is, I think, what the Islamic tradition offers. So, I'll end there, and I'm curious / terrified about the comments from Justice Bokhary, but I'm looking forward to them either way.